Have you ever been in this situation where you've got a rental unit, a house that you want to rent out, and you put it out for rent, you have a no pets policy, you don't want pets being in the house, and you put it out for rent, you have people coming to see it, and you have this amazing resident that comes to you that says, I want to rent this, and by the way, I've got an emotional support animal. Wait, no, actually I have two. I have a service animal too. And this is a situation that sometimes landlords are in, and I'm going to talk about that today. I'm Nate with Keyrenter Property Management, and I want to share with you what your rights are as a landlord and what maybe some of the consequences are for residents who are lying about their situation. And that's the thing that's interesting, is there's actually been laws passed to combat this, or at least to warn residents that they can't just go on the internet and print off a certificate because they don't want to pay pet deposits and fees. So let me back up a little bit. First, what is our obligation as housing providers according to HUD? And in the email and in the video, we'll have linked a resource where you can actually read the most recent document that HUD put out on service animals and ESA animals, or emotional support animals. This is back in January 2020. And it's one of those things that was kind of looked over by a lot of housing providers, but there's some great stuff in there, as well as just some clarification and updates for us landlords and investors, so we know what's going on, so we can make sure that we're abiding by fair housing in these sort of situations. Okay, so what our obligation is, according to HUD, is to provide reasonable accommodation for someone who has a legitimate need for a service animal or an emotional support animal. So a reasonable accommodation, usually that means if we have a no pets policy, we make an exception. And if we normally charge deposit and fees, we cannot do that if it's a legitimate service animal or ESA animal. So what can we do? And this is the frustration for a lot of landlords, is the fines for a landlord to violate fair housing and to actually say no to someone when it was a legitimate situation. They can be really heavy. I mean, we've seen fines in the tens of thousands of dollars to housing providers for violating fair housing laws. So what can we do? Well, luckily and gratefully, HUD was willing to listen, and one of our attorneys was actually very involved with HUD on a national level to see about getting clarification on what we can do. And here's what we can do. And one thing I just want to note is, please consult your landlord attorney, your eviction attorney, if you have very specific situations, right? The advice that I'll give is what we do and what we do in our business. However, for your situation, just make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's as you're approaching this process, or some of these things I might share. So what you can do is you can verify. And you can verify two things. You can verify that there is actually a handicap, and you can also verify that the animal improves or ameliorates the handicap, or the ability for them to perform and to do the life function that is limited because of their handicap. So here's a couple examples that you can do, and you can ask, say, a medical provider who is saying to you that this is actually a service animal or an emotional support animal that's needed. And that's one thing I'll just kind of side note here too, is who do we have a doctor's note from? Does it need to be an actual doctor? Is it that resident's medical practitioner or whatever it is? And that's good, and usually it is, but it doesn't always have to be that person. It doesn't have to be a doctor necessarily. It needs to be someone that knows their situation and they have actual knowledge of the handicap, as well as just their situation. They have direct information on that. So there's actually been cases across the country where the note's from someone's mom, or it's from their therapist. And it can be a little bit gray in terms of, okay, do we push really hard on this? But the fact of the matter is when we're verifying, and it is, say, someone that's very familiar with their situation, they have a professional level of knowledge about their situation, we can push a little bit and we can verify. Now, we have forms that our attorney has provided. And if you want some of these forms, like the questionnaire that's sent to the medical provider, the questionnaire, the list of forms that the resident needs to provide, just respond via email to the email you received for this, and we can send those over to you. Here's some example questions that you can ask to the medical doctor or person with that direct knowledge. Does the resident have a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more of such person's major life activities? Does the resident have a record of having such an impairment, or is the resident regarded as having such an impairment? Okay, so we're asking this, we're getting them to verify the handicap. Okay, now asking about the animals, the important thing is that we establish a nexus between the handicap and the animal. It's not good enough to say that there's a handicap and that the animal is great, but it actually doesn't improve the situation. In that case, we don't have to provide that reasonable accommodation. There's got to be a nexus, and that's one thing that HUD has clarified, is establishing that nexus by verifying the animal and the handicap. So here's a sample question. Does this specific animal directly ameliorate or improve the limitation this resident has caused by the disability? Very simple. And when they're providing that, the form we have actually states, language like, that they are attesting to this, they're verifying this. And one thing that you can also make mention that's important when the resident's applying, you just kind of suspect that, I don't think this is a real situation. Now, you got to be careful there, and you don't want to just say that to your resident, because that could get you in some trouble, especially if it ends up being a real situation. But if you just have that feeling, let your residents know that it's actually a misdemeanor. Now in the state of Utah, it's a Class C misdemeanor, which is more of like a slap on the hand, but it's still a misdemeanor. It's against the law to lie about it. It's against the law to just not want to pay pet deposit and fees and print something off the internet. In fact, this is kind of a funny thing around our office. Whenever a resident comes and they have their dog that's in this nice vest that says service animal, and they have this certificate they printed out from a fancy website, usually that's a red flag that it's not legitimate. Okay, so keep in mind, if they provide you this awesome glowing certificate, be leery that you can just kind of pay $25 for that at different websites and print it off. So the verification is critical, and that's key. And so again, if you want those forms, feel free to just respond. I'm happy to send those to you. But this is what we do. We verify the handicap, we verify the animal, we establish a nexus. If there's a nexus, they're approved. If not, we can deny that claim. We can deny the request for reasonable accommodation. Okay, so again, consult your legal counsel in different situations, or talk to us. We're happy to help out too. But I hope this is helpful for you, and you guys have an awesome day. Take care.